All right, joining Sandy and me at the round table now, President and CEO of Rock Ventures and the CEO of the M1 rail line, Matt Cullen. CEO of, let me get all my titles straight, CEO of the Ignition Media Group, and now we should add restaurateur. Dennis Archer Jr. back with us, and business columnist for the Detroit News, Daniel House, is here as well. Thank you all very much. Matt, I'd like to start with where Sandy and I left off here. This talent gap that we talk so much about, the struggle that where we still remain a place with too many people who don't have college degrees. I mentioned earlier we were a place where you didn't necessarily have to aspire to one before. What do we do? And how big of a deal is it?
Well, it's a big deal, but we have to work it two ways. I think obviously we have to try and mitigate that through the education piece, which I know you're going to be talking about next. I mean, there's a lot of work to be done in that regard. A lot of smart young people are coming into the region, which is really important as well. Yep. I mean, we can't minimize that. And then we have to find opportunities for people that don't require those kinds of educational requirements yet. I mean, we have to still find, there are still a lot of people in our community that are not going to go back to school at this age and stage, and we need to find opportunities for them as well. So it's not an easy one, and we got to attack all three, I think.
Devin, the fastest growing demographic in the city of Detroit is 25 to 35 college educated, to Matt's point. It's a really positive sign.
Dennis, you and I have talked a ton about talent and mentoring and trying to create this new, out of the whole cloth that we have here.
Right.
Instead of needing everybody to come in, how do we build them up from inside
I think, and Matt touched on it, I mean, I think the number is somewhere around 28% of the area's residents, or Detroiters at least, have college degrees. And so college is not for everyone. That's not the answer for everyone. But I think that the importance of education should still be stressed, and higher education should be stressed. Yeah. But for those where that does not work necessarily, I think the skilled trades is a great opportunity. But I think what's very important, particularly in urban areas, is that the education piece is pushed first, and then for those where it doesn't work, then there's another path. I think if you look at the dearth of employees for a lot of these construction jobs, right? Because the city of Detroit has certain mandates on contractors that are doing some of these larger projects. And if you listen to the contractors and the unions, they'll tell you, we love to hire Detroiters, we can't find them.
Daniel, we run up against, you and I hear this all the time, we run up against this all the time, and people who have insist that Detroit can only get so far without the education piece somehow being solved.
I think that's true, and I think the situation you have right now that with Detroit Public Schools are a mess, and no one is able to really has found a solution, a compromise solution that they can move the ball forward. And that is going to be something that's going to plague the mayor, I think, going forward in terms of trying to do what is his #1 priority, which is to bring more people in. Now, there are young people coming in, but are they going to stay here, and are our families going to stay here? I think that's a really important piece.
And yet, Sandy, as I mentioned to you earlier, I find myself saying, well, isn't that the problem in every big city in America? Haven't they all figured a way to work? Because there's not one great big city school system anywhere in the country.
But there are better ones.
Okay.
I mean,
okay. We're talking degrees of bad, though, more than we're talking great or good.
Okay, so overall, urban education in this nation is hugely challenged, but there are some examples of where things are working at least substantially better than we're seeing in Detroit. Because let's face it, Detroit is at the bottom of a very bad barrel when it comes to educational attainment. I'm just talking about the city. I'm talking about DPS and, frankly, the entire educational system in Detroit. It's not just DPS. The charters aren't performing that much better than DPS. But even New York Public Schools, New York City Public Schools has done some really good things. Minneapolis has done some really good things. There are examples out there. Places in Tennessee in their urban areas have done some really good things. There are some examples. There is not one example that's going to work for Detroit, but
the culture of this town and this state is there has to be a crisis. We don't move unless there's a crisis.
I think we have one.
Well, I agree, but we finally got to the point we had bankruptcy in the city, and they moved and did things that people said that could never be done. Look what's happened to General Motors and Ford and Chrysler. Right? So many examples, but you had to have a crisis, and I don't know what's going to actually crystallize this crisis.
This was really interesting the other night, Dennis. We have come out of, it's been a year since the bankruptcy, as I mentioned off the top of the program. The outside world thinks it's a miracle that Detroit came through the way that they did and the time that they did. And at a big conversation at Wayne State the other night, the governor, the mayor, the judge all basically shouted down they had to cancel the meeting. Are we missing what happened in our own the success of our own story?
No, I think that everyone is appreciative of the success, and I think that it's kind of, you know, I tell my staff at work all the time, Janet Jackson has a song, "What Have You Done For Me Lately?" And so it's great that we're beyond that, but to your point, I mean, there are other crisis situations among us. A lot of the reports that came out, Sandy, from the Chamber State of the Region, it's a lot of great information. A lot of the indices that you will look to measure success, domestic product, unemployment's down, income is up, STEM jobs are up.
Yep.
Those are great.
International investment.
International investment, foreign investment's up. But when you talk about the schools, a lot of it's a bad situation here. But I will say there are some bright spots. There are some best practices that we could probably pull from even here in Detroit. And, you know, when a lot of these young people do begin to have kids, they may look to go elsewhere. But I think that the perception is there are no good schools, public schools, or charter schools in Detroit, and that's not true.
Incorrect, yes. Yeah. Matt, your take on where we are here, especially in light of the year since the bankruptcy.
Well, I think it isn't true that there aren't good schools, and it really is. I've got a flock of colleagues that have moved into the city, and we've got almost 4,000 people now that live in the city, of team members of ours, and they're throughout the city. And they are really actively getting engaged in the educational process, which I think is equally important. I mean, they are literally going and interviewing schools and starting to talk to people. And I think people, much like it took place really with the city and the financial restructuring, the community at large really took charge of the process to almost around and embrace the politicians, but they didn't allow just the politicians to do it. I think it's going to be the same thing with the schools. I mean, the broad community has to engage in it in an effective way, and the business folks and the community leaders have to demand.
But you're sensing at that point that Daniel was talking about, where they're reaching the age of having a family, they're staying. They want to stay.
They're staying. I mean, and what's really interesting is some of the near-end neighborhoods, it's West Village and it's Palmer Park, and it's different places that people are really starting to embrace. So I think it's building on the foundation, which is often happens in economic development, right? They're building on the strong neighborhoods, and they're building on the proximity to downtown, and you're seeing a lot of it, and they are staying, and they're investing.
This is a process of time and results. You know, people, I think, maybe that protested this week, you know, wanted immediate results, or they don't like the results they've got so far, so they protest. But this is going to take time, and business and government are going to have to be delivering results, and over time, the people that Matt's talking about are going to get more involved. They're going to put their kids in those schools, and all of a sudden, this stuff's going to change, and people like Dennis and Matt are going to be doing stuff with businesses downtown. Things are going to change. That's what we need, and as long as we've got a positive economic environment, knock on wood, you know, that momentum I think will continue.
Great place for us to wrap it up. Can you get us all in for brunch over at Central now?
Absolutely.
Great. We're heading over that way. Thank you very much for being here. Meet the Press coming up next right after Mitch Albom's Heart of Detroit. Have a great week. We'll see you next time for Flashpoint.